Story 1. I was in 11th grade physics. The day before, my neighbor, who was the mother of a friend in my class, died by suicide. I was the one who found her. I had nightmares all night and skipped the first half of school. When my physics teacher saw me later, she asked where I had been that morning. Before I could explain, she said my friend had been looking for me and seemed unusually worried. He had still attended class and not told anyone, but he was worried about me. I could not tell her what had happened, so I said I had overslept. Story 2. I had a student whose father had died and who had not done any homework or preparation for geography class. From what I heard, the teacher scolded him for not doing it, but the student did not want to say anything because it was a sensitive matter. His best friend shouted at the teacher, "Don't you have any shame? His father died last night." The teacher replied, "I don't care." There was an audible gasp. I was in the next room. The teacher is no longer employed here. Story 3. My auto shop teacher let me practice removing and installing the tires on his vehicle. The next morning, about 20 minutes into first period, there was no sign of him. He ran into the classroom out of breath, his hair a mess. He pointed at me and shouted, asking what a torque wrench is used for. I replied that I did not know. He said he knew I did not know. It turned out one of his tires had come off while he was driving on the highway. Story 4. She had to take her sister to school and drive her mother to rehab. She was always late to class because her mother wanted to sleep in. The problem was that if her mother was late or did not go, she would violate her probation and go to prison. I never marked her late. If she missed anything important, she could come in at lunch or after school to make it up. Story 5. Student here. I headed to school early to study in the library before my night class. I was one exit away when I was caught in a 3-car accident. Most of the expressway was gridlocked with only one lane open. I eventually made it into my lab class 15 minutes late with a few scrapes and bruises. My professor's reaction was simply, "Oh, that was you." Story 6. Not a student, but one of my teaching assistants when I ran a preschool in West Philly. "Sorry I missed yesterday. My friend shot my mom." Naturally, I'm a little speechless. "Oh no, it's okay. He was aiming for someone else." Story 7. I was one of about 20 children who were late to school. We arrived at the school office as a group, and when asked why we were late, we said, "The school bus blew up." They asked, "Do you mean the engine blew up?" We replied, "No, the whole bus was in flames." There was a lot of discussion among the teachers who thought we had embellished the story. Then one of the administrative staff had the news website open, showing a clear image of an entire bus on fire with a group of children in our school uniforms standing in front of it. Our late slip read, "School bus blew up." Story 8. Former student here. "Sorry, boss. My stepfather tried to kill us last night, and I had to deal with the police." The professor looked at me for a moment and said, "Dude, do you want to go grab a drink and talk about this after class?" My English professor was a bro when I was in college. Story 9. He told me he was pulled over by the police for riding his bicycle erratically. They thought he was drunk, but it turned out he was just dodging slugs on the street. Story 10. A student in my college class missed class one day. The next day, he came in with one eye covered and medical paperwork in hand. It turned out he had been pecked in the eye by a chicken. Story 11. At a school sporting event, a team member was late because someone had stolen his windshield wipers during a snowstorm. He had to keep pulling over to the side of the road to clear the windshield. Story 12. I was a pupil, not a teacher. I was in a car crash on my way to school. About 5 cars were involved because someone tried to overtake us as we slowed for a turn. I went to the hospital to be checked and then arrived at school 3 hours late. I had small cuts all over my face, from flying glass and a very sore shoulder. My teachers would not believe me until the police arrived because they had forgotten to take a statement from me. Apparently, some of the other people involved died, and the person who caused the crash was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Story 13. After September 11th, my small-town high school received bomb threats every week for 2 months, and the school made us attend class on a Saturday. About 5 of us showed up, and every teacher said something like, "I can't wait for the excuses on Monday." Most excuses were along the lines of family plans or whatnot. But one student had to read his father's note aloud because our first period teacher found it hilarious. In the deepest Southern accent you can imagine, the note went something like, "My son is not too smart, but he knows you are not supposed to get punished for someone else being a dumbass. I bought him a six-pack so he was drunk. You all can fuck off. I wish we had smartphones then so I could have recorded it." Story 14. I'm not the teacher, but we were told that he had a paramedic student who, on their way to take their final exam, rolled their car into a creek. They grabbed whatever books they could from the car and ran the rest of the way to class. They arrived late and in tears. They were given a different exam date. Story 15. When I was a student teacher, I was late because there were a bunch of chickens in the middle of the road. They would not move at all. This was in a city of 200,000 people. Freaking chickens. I finally got to school and profusely apologized to my mentor teacher. I told her why I was late, thinking it sounded ridiculous. She said, "Yeah, those chickens are fucking assholes. They surrounded my car in the McDonald's parking lot last year. Don't worry about it." Story 16. I had a 6-year-old turn up late to her lesson and blurted out, "Sorry I was late. I had to color in a bunny. Seems fair." Story 17. In high school, I biked to class. One day I hit a rock and took a bad fall. I arrived late. Before I could say a word, my teacher stopped class and said, "Thank you for finally joining us. Why are you so late?" I raised my hands and elbows, which were heavily bloodied. It must have looked bad, because she gasped and rushed me to the school nurse, apologizing the entire way. Edit, my bad. I am not a teacher. Story 18. In my hometown, if you walked into any place late and said the phrase "sorry, grain train," you were never challenged. It was extremely common for trains with more than 50 carriages to run through the middle of town. Story 19. Music television paid him $50 to fill his backpack with cement and carry it around for the day. I accepted that excuse. The student later regretted it because the cost of a replacement backpack and college textbooks far exceeded $50. He got his moment of fame, and I did not penalize him for being late. You have to live a little. Someone later found a newspaper article. It turns out it was $200. He earned $100 for the first day and $100 when he returned the next day. I had remembered $50, but it was 19 years ago. He still lost all his stuff because of the cement, and he told me it was not worth it. Story 20. I taught a group of seniors during first period toward the end of the year. I had a class of around 30 students, but only 5 were there when the bell rang. Halfway through class, the rest of them showed up. They had gone to Cracker Barrel for breakfast and brought some back for me. All was forgiven. Story 21. I'm Pink. A fair-skinned student, age 10, went with a friend to the holy festival at a nearby Hindu temple, where she was covered with red powder and dyed bright red from head to toe. Her mother, another teacher at the school, made her sit for hours in the bathtub to soak it off. But even after another round of early morning shower scrubbing, she arrived at school a pleasant shade of pink. Technically, she was not late, but she stayed in her mother's classroom until the bell rang. Story 22. My neighbor had a very social goat that learned to escape its pen to come over and hang out. One day the goat followed me to the bus stop and tried to get on when the bus arrived. I could not board the bus with the goat right behind me, so I had to get off, take the goat home, and call my father to drive me to school. Story 23. A chemistry professor arrived about 15 minutes late. He explained that he had just been in a car accident. His car had rolled over, but he still came. He said he was okay. He drove a Volvo. Story 24. My best friend and I used to roller skate to school. One day we both forgot to put our shoes in our backpacks. So we skated to the vice principal's office and were excused from first period to go home. On the way back, we stopped at Taco Bell for breakfast because we figured we were already excused. Story 25. In the United Kingdom, a student could not submit an assignment on time because the wireless internet was down on the Megabus. Thanks for the support. I will tell the student that his Megabus mishap is relatable around the world. Story 26. A teacher received a message from a student saying he would be late because his car had a flat tire. The student was known for partying, so the teacher, thinking it unlikely, asked him as a joke to bring the tire. He brought the flat tire in the middle of the exam. The teacher did not expect that. Story 27. A good friend of mine experienced this. She attended the Royal Military College of Canada, where cadets wear uniforms and tourists often visit the campus. It was common for students to be stopped by tourists who wanted photographs. If students arrived late, they could simply say the word tourists and the professors would let it pass. She often wondered how many family photos she appeared in during her time there. Story 28. I was on a bus when it hit a bird, and the entire windshield cracked. We had to wait for another bus to pick us up. Story 29. Not a teacher, but a friend said his house blew away. Apparently, a tornado. Story 30. I was not a teacher, but I was training a new hire, and he arrived 45 minutes late, saying he had gotten halfway to work and realized he did not have shoes on. It was winter and about 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Story 31. This was me when I was a student. My parents thought I had President's Day off, so they did not wake me up. Story 32. A kid's apartment burned down overnight. He was a little late but still came. Story 33. Today, a student missed my first hour class. The note said there had been a car accident on the way to school, and the student would be late. The student arrived for second hour with pictures on his phone of the rollover accident. I told him to go home, rest, and take care of himself. I have another story from college when we were training to be teachers. A classmate missed an important class and arrived for the last 10 minutes because her neighbor, who was in active labor, knocked on her door asking for help shortly before she was due to leave. The classmate walked back to the neighbor's house and delivered the baby in the living room while on the phone with emergency services. Paramedics arrived and the mother and baby were fine, but the classmate needed to go home to shower and change because she was covered in blood. Story 34. A flock of wild turkeys in the road. Not always, but this has happened more than once in my life. For those who have never been in this situation, there is no way out of it. Wild turkeys will move only when they decide to, and only then. Story 35. A student missed my first period class one morning, but he was in school later that day. When I asked him why he had not arrived in time for my course, he said his cow was giving birth that morning, so he had chosen the barn over English. That made sense to me. His essays were not going to win any ribbons at the county fair, but his calf could. Story 36. I had a teacher who arrived about halfway through the class. Her car had slid during the intense snowstorm the night before, so she walked the last mile or so. Story 37. I am a teacher, but this happened when I was a student. Does it count? In high school, a student arrived late to history class. He was a joker, so when someone asked him where he had been, he said, "I was kidnapped." Everyone laughed until he added, "No, really." It turned out 2 men had kidnapped him and tossed him into the back of the minivan he used for his morning paper route. They drove him around while they committed a robbery. I cannot remember what happened after. I think they simply drove the van somewhere and got away. Story 38. When I was in college, my psychology professor told us that the only excuse for being late was a funeral procession. Any other reason, you would not be allowed to come in. A few weeks into the semester, I was headed from one building to another, which involved crossing the main road. Lo and behold, there was one very long funeral procession going by. I took a short video as proof, then stood on the sidewalk to let it pass. Unfortunately, the procession made me 5 minutes late to class. I knocked on the door, and the professor came over to tell me off. I showed her the video. Well, I'll be damned. Come in. Story 39. My car was struck by lightning in the school parking lot. Its tires were melted to the pavement. I had to go out, arrange a tow truck, and call my parents. It was pretty dramatic. Story 40. I am not a teacher, but I am an administrator at a music school. A mother frantically called and said her daughter would probably be late or miss her guitar lesson in a couple of hours because she could not find her. I said, okay, I will let her teacher know. About an hour later, the same mother called back. She had found her daughter. The daughter had gone to a friend's house and decided to dye her hair green. They lived quite close, so I told them they could still come in for the lesson. The mother said she would call back within a minute or two, but she did not. Her daughter arrived about 5 minutes late with bright green hair. I have to admit it looked really cool, but it was a confusing experience to witness the build-up. Edit. Thank you for the award. It is my first one. Story 41. Not a teacher, but a kid walked into my class one day and literally said, "Sorry I'm late. I didn't want to be here." He wasn't wrong, I suppose. Story 42. I am not a teacher, but I was hit by a car while riding my bicycle to university, and my professor was very understanding about why I was late. Story 43. My best friend was doing a care assistant job in preparation for later training as a nurse. He lived a train ride away, but it was okay because work was 5 minutes from the train station. Someone jumped in front of his train as it was approaching the station. Everyone was stuck on the train while it was determined whether the person could be saved and whether it was a crime scene on the tracks. Hours later, he got into work a little cheesed off but apologized. And he promptly found out it had been one of the patients who had made him late for work. It was a semi-secure hospital for adults with dementia. I had missed the teacher's part. Story 44. My best story ever. I taught in a hardcore inner-city school. One student arrived at 10:30. I asked, "Where were you?" He said his bus was late. I asked, "Why would your bus be 3 hours late?" He said, "Miss, there was a drive-by shooting." I said, "Oh, my goodness, are you okay? Did someone shoot at the bus?" He said, "No, ma'am. A student fired a gun from the bus. We were pulled over and the police had to search everyone. The student with the gun was the last to be searched. True story. You can't make this up." Story 45. Kindergarten teacher. One of my students is an extremely heavy sleeper. They often arrive late and miss our first class. After nap time, they remain asleep no matter what we do. Music, tilting the bed slightly, asking questions, even gently standing them up produce no response. Most children give a cheeky grin when they do not want to wake, but we get absolutely no reaction from this child until they naturally wake. There is no medical issue. They just sleep like a rock. Story 46. I was walking to school when 2 of our cats started following me. I had to round them up and take them home. My father wrote me a note for my lateness that read, "Animal Show and Tell Day. Thanks for the awards. Here are pictures of the cats." The 2 that followed me were the orange one sitting on the dishwasher door and the tabby underneath it. Fun fact, all but one cat, the tabby in the middle, had the same mother. Story 47. I had a college algebra teacher who showed up late or did not show for almost every class. The other students thought it was hilarious because if there was no teacher for 15 minutes you could leave. We had no class for a huge chunk of the semester, and it really aggravated me. This was before YouTube and I was not understanding the math at all. The girl trying to tutor me did not speak English well, and my grade, for the first time in my life, was suffering. I was paying for the class. One day the teacher showed up about 20 minutes late. I was one of the few people who had not left early. He walked in angrily, slammed his briefcase on the desk and said, "I apologize for this semester. I have cancer. I am dying." Then he left. I do not know what happened to him, to be honest. Story 48. I am an English professor. One year, a very good student showed up without one of his 2 major term papers. He explained that his safe had been stolen by a contractor working on his house. His laptop was in the safe and that is where his paper was. I believed him because he had been a reliable student. Over the next few weeks, he began coming to class looking exhausted. He said he was hunting for the person who stole his safe and spending late nights with his cousin driving around because they knew the thief's van. The student and his cousin had both recently returned from tours in Iraq and had seen combat. They wanted to find the man to beat him up and get the safe back because his wife's wedding ring and a lot of cash were inside. He rewrote the paper and turned it in, apologizing that it was not up to his usual standard, but he still looked as if he had not slept. After a while, he came to my office hours very happy and said he had found the man after a long search that involved breaking into a meth house, shaking people down with baseball bats, and even bribing some prostitutes. They found the man's van at a Taco Bell after a tip from a prostitute, cornered him, and waited for the police. I later read that he had in fact made a citizen's arrest at a Taco Bell, and that the Secret Service became involved because the thief had used the stolen cash to buy counterfeiting equipment. The Secret Service investigates counterfeiting, so the whole investigation followed. The student, whom I nicknamed the White Shaft, tracked the thief through a rough neighborhood late at night to recover a wedding ring, some cash, and his research paper. It all turned out to be true. He got the ring and the laptop back. I accepted his original paper, and it received a much higher grade than the rewrite. A few more details. I cannot recall the year, but it was at the height of the war between the United States and Iraq. My student had enlisted in the Army right after September 11, 2001, on the same day as his cousin. They were just out of high school and joined, out of patriotism and frustration. When he started his vigilante actions, he went into a house used by meth addicts to try to find the thief. They forced everyone out into the street with baseball bats. When the police arrived, the officers told him how dangerous that was and warned him not to do it again. They gave him their cards and told him to call them if anything happened. They shook down at least 2 other drug dens, and the same officer was waiting outside both times to arrest people, since everyone was outside without a need for a search warrant. I told my student how dangerous this all was. He was very determined about getting his wife's wedding ring back. I tried to find a link to the story, but it was a small item and I cannot remember the year. Story 49. Not me, but someone in my class. A student turned in work late after missing 2 classes. 2 classes amounted to a full week, so it was noticeable. The professor looked at him and said, "I hope someone died for you to be this late." The student replied, "Does my dad count?" I had always heard the expression "you could hear a pin drop," and never thought much about it, but after that you could have heard a pin drop. Story 50. I was robbed at gunpoint and my car was stolen the previous night. I spoke with police officers and detectives until the early morning. But as a dedicated corporate employee, I showed up to work the next day about an hour late. Even in public accounting, they understood and said it was clearly an appropriate reason not to come to work. Looking back, I probably should have taken the day off. My coworkers likely thought I was crazy for brushing the incident off and coming into work. Story 51. A little off topic, but in 8th grade, a friend of mine turned in her homework late because her dog literally ate it. She even brought a note from her parents. Story 52. I am not a teacher, but a student came into class a little injured and almost an hour late. He had accidentally driven off a cliff while texting and his phone was broken. So he walked to the nearest place to get help. He was taken to the hospital almost immediately and was okay except for a concussion and bruises. Story 53. I teach psychology online to international students. One semester, I had a student from Finland who submitted an assignment late. His excuse was, "My grandmother was hit by a reindeer while getting the mail." Story 54. When he arrived 5 minutes and 55 seconds late, my art teacher apologized and said Bohemian Rhapsody came on just as he parked. Story 55. I woke up and went into my kitchen, which was completely black with soot and full of smoke. My mother had left the clothes iron on overnight. My school uniform was destroyed. I was 25 minutes late to school and was the only person not wearing the uniform. Damage to the kitchen was approximately $35,000. Story 56. A student of mine discovered this year that an interview she gave was quoted in an article in Time magazine. That seemed like a good reason to tell everyone on her way to class. I let it slide. Story 57. My friends and I were having lunch and kicking around a makeshift tinfoil ball to pass the time. Someone kicked it to me, and I put my full force into volleying it back into the air. My right shoe, a Converse half a size too big, came off my foot and landed on top of a 3-story building. I had to call my mother to pick me up so I could go home and change shoes. She was extremely angry. Story 58. I have told this story before. Note: I am not a teacher. I was a student. I was constantly late to a class my senior year of high school. I had depression and was on a Section 504 accommodation plan as a result. For this reason, I was allowed some extra time in the hallways before class to recover from the mental stress of being in a classroom. It was very helpful and, yes, a pretty unusual Section 504 plan. One time I was running late and witnessed a car hit a pedestrian crossing the road, severely injuring him, and the car drove away. My brother, who liked cars, recognized the vehicle and identified it as belonging to our neighbor, who was also in my first period class. I stopped to help the pedestrian, who was also a student at the school, because I had first aid and lifeguard training. I called an ambulance for him and waited for it to arrive. I also called the school and told them that he would be going to the hospital. When I got to school, my brother and I went to the front office to get a note excusing our tardiness. The administrator I had called was waiting there. He thanked me, gave me a note, and said to tell the teacher to call him with any questions. My brother told the administrator about the car and that we knew the driver. We both went to our classes. I arrived late to first period again, and my teacher did not want to hear my excuse. I handed her the note and told the story anyway. The driver of the car was sitting in the back of the classroom with a guilty look on her face. She looked terrified. When my teacher kept scolding me for my supposed lie, I gave up and waited for justice to take its course. For the record, I had never lied about being late. I had overslept. I never invoked my Section 504 plan for that particular class, even though my teacher was required to honor it. Halfway through class, the administrator entered with the school resource officer and informed my teacher that a student needed to come with him immediately for a hit and run. He saw that I was sitting there and thanked me again for my help and for putting another person's needs above my own. It was satisfying to help that student, but it was especially satisfying to see my teacher's face change from disgusted at the driver to shocked and disgusted when she realized my story was true. Story 59. My car froze shut during an ice storm. This happened before power locks and keyless entry existed. That went very wrong. Story 60. This happened to me as a pupil. A very quiet, unassuming boy in our class came into German class with about 5 minutes remaining. We went to a Catholic school where the teachers were strict and intimidating. Lessons were usually silent, especially in junior school. When he came in at the end of the lesson that day, the door flew inward with such force that the teacher gave an audible gasp. It had been raining heavily outside. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His blazer was dripping and sodden. Mud caked his trousers up to his knees, and he was breathing heavily. The teacher exclaimed, "Brendan, what happened?" We all stared in shocked silence. The boy let out a big sigh and said, "I took a shortcut," then went straight to his seat. That line became iconic in our school for years afterward. Story 61. During my senior year of high school, they were doing construction on the building and part of it was closed. To make up for the lack of space, a nearby vocational school let us use some extra rooms. To get there, you could take a bus, or if your last class was at the vocational school, you could drive. I was driving a friend and myself to the same English class. Traffic was stop and go because of the many buses and students. The driver behind me was not paying attention during a stop and rear-ended me. It was just a bump and we were all fine. We both had beat up cars, so we decided the damage was not significant and got back in line to go to class. The student who hit us was also in the same English class. My friend and I walked into class late. The teacher, known for being a stickler, said snidely that we had better have a good reason for being tardy. My friend laughed and I explained that we had been rear-ended and that he could confirm when he arrived. A minute later he rushed in, apologized for being tardy, and said he had hit Kmuli and his friend. The class laughed, the teacher put everyone back to work, and that was it. Story 62. I was a student who was late. A friend gave me a lift on his moped. He hit a corner too fast and we slid off. We rode back to my house. My mom fixed both our trousers and we were only 20 minutes late to class. It was PE, so we had to wear shorts and the teacher could see our scratched up legs. Story 63. I remember in high school another student asked our history teacher this question. Our teacher's answer was that he once had a student run in 20 minutes late, not say a word, turn the classroom television on, and start flipping through channels. When the teacher asked him what he was doing, the late student said the country was under attack. He said he had thought the teacher might not have heard because his father had been yelling at him to return home while he was just down the block. The student explained he had gone home to see what his father wanted. His father hugged him, showed him the news, and then drove him to school, making him late. Our teacher explained the only acceptable reasons he had ever allowed for someone to arrive late were September 11th, 2001, or a personal tragedy. Story 64. When I was in high school, our apartment in Brooklyn, New York, was broken into. Thankfully, nobody was home, but all of our electronics were stolen. My computer, I had a desktop with a big screen at the time, was also stolen. It had been connected to the same outlet as my alarm clock. The clock's time was reset, and I went to bed not realizing I needed to reset the alarm as well. I arrived at my Saturday Scholastic Assessment test prep about 2 hours late. I explained what happened to the teacher, and she met with me later in the week to go over the material. She was a rock star. Story 65. A few years ago, I was working as a trainer in a call center in South Africa when none of my trainees showed up for our 9 a.m. start time. One of the trainees called me at about 9:15 a.m. and said they were all on the same train, which had been hijacked. Armed men had boarded the train, taken control of it, and were robbing everyone. He was very apologetic, saying they would arrive as soon as they could and apologizing for delaying the training. They were still only 15 minutes late, and during my time there, that was the most South African thing I had ever seen. Story 66. I was a student. The bus driver drove over a small boulder, and it became wedged in the wheel well. We had to stop and wait for a replacement bus. Story 67. I was leaving Nellis Air Force Base with 20 minutes to get to my final presentation last semester, when a wheel came off into the desert. I kept the vehicle from flipping and got it to the shoulder, where I used one of the 3 usable lug studs and threaded it through. On the other side, I got the wheel back on and hobbled to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas campus, arriving only 10 minutes late. I gave my presentation and did all right, albeit covered in grease and drenched in sweat. My hub was ruined, but the semester was saved. Story 68. Obligatory. I am not a teacher. My dad, who was a teacher, was late because his car was surrounded by sheep and he could not get out. Joys of living in Wales. Story 69. I once encountered a traffic jam because of a duck. Goddamn duck. Story 70. Edit. Thanks for the awards, but it was not necessary. I did not think this would be read by more than a few people. A student told me he could not do the work because he was delivering oil from 3 p.m. until 11 p.m. He was in middle school and he was not lying. His father had broken both of his shoulders and a clavicle, so his grandmother and his pregnant mother were taking turns driving. I was pretty sure he did most of it at night and he was hooking up the tanks to the oil. I called all his teachers, had his workload lightened, and got permission for him to arrive an hour late each day because he was the sole income for his family of 8 as the oldest. I tutored him so he could pass 7th grade. I paid for the oil for years until I moved out of the area. Story 71. A kid was late to school and missed an important football game because his pug fell asleep on his phone. The pug's rolls muffled the alarm. Story 72. Not a teacher, but at the end of year 11 on our last day we had a mini awards ceremony. One award was for the best excuse for being late. A boy in my year had gotten his shoes wet and they had not dried by morning, so he did the logical thing and put them in the oven. Story 73. The cows got out, so I had to wrangle them back into their pen. Story 74. A friend of mine from school sent the teacher a photo of the airport screen showing that his flight was delayed. Story 75. They were getting Kentucky Fried Chicken for breakfast, which was great because they brought me some. Lateness excused. Story 76. This is a true story I do not think anyone believed. I was walking to the university after parking my car about 1 kilometer from campus because there was no parking meter. On one of the windiest days I have experienced, I was crossing an overpass when one of my earbuds fell out. As I reached up to put it back in my ear, a heavy gust of wind slapped me in the face, knocked my glasses off, and sent them over the barrier onto the road below. I staggered and could not find them. I saw them on the road about half a second before a semi-truck ran over them. I stood there stunned. Should I go sit in class? Should I walk back to my apartment, perhaps 4 kilometers away? Should I drive home blind? After pondering for too long, I remembered that attendance was mandatory for marks, so I walked into class 10 minutes late, unpacked nothing, and just sat there. The discussion with my professor after class did not go well. Story 77. I am not a teacher, but my friend was about to leave for school while drinking juice when he spilled it all over himself. He went back home to change clothes and wash the dirty ones and arrived approximately 3 hours late. I am not sure if it is true, but he never misses class and he had a photo of himself covered in juice. Story 78. I was late for a grade 10 history exam. The teacher said I should beg for forgiveness. I told him my house had burned down. My friends and I still laugh to this day about how funny and defeated he looked. Story 79. I'm not a teacher, but my science teacher was hounding me to retake a test after school. Before she gave me the paper, I stepped out to take a phone call. It turned out my parents were getting divorced, and my father had been arrested because my mother falsely accused him of rape. He had filed at the courthouse before her and therefore had residence in the house and custody. My teacher found me and thought I was having an emotional breakdown over the test. I blurted out everything. She vaguely understood while trying to calm me. I was terrified because my mother was mentally unstable, and I feared she would kill me for telling my father to divorce her. Long story short, it worked out. My father was released, and I never have to see her again. Phew. Story 80. A student came in late from lunch but handed me a half-dozen fresh tamales from his family's tamaleria. I was 9 months pregnant, so he did not get in trouble. Story 81. I was late, and my history teacher asked why I had arrived with about 5 minutes of class remaining. I said I had been attacked by a dog, so I went home to bandage my wounds and then walked back to school. It was an unusual experience because the dog was young and had very sharp new teeth. Story 82. My senior year of high school, I was dual enrolled at the local college, taking night classes, so I only had 2 classes at the high school. The schedule put me in first period and last period, with the middle of the day off. I usually drove to a nearby wilderness area and hiked by a river. On this particular day, there was an old van in the parking area at the trailhead. I parked next to it and got out of my car. As I walked past the van, I noticed a man inside. We made eye contact and I smiled and waved, but then I saw he was fully naked and masturbating. I freaked out, but instead of getting back in my car and leaving, I ran away from the parking area, straight through the river, which was about 2 to 3 feet deep and 20 feet across, and crouched in bushes where I could still see the lot. I was sure he would chase me, rape and murder me, and no one would know because it was 1 p.m. on a Tuesday in the middle of nowhere. When he did not chase me, I was still terrified he would be waiting at my car, so I would not go back until I saw him leave or another car arrived. It was the year 2000, so I did not have a cell phone, and I waited over an hour. When another car arrived, I emerged, ran back through the river, climbed into my car from the passenger side because the driver's side was next to the van, and drove away quickly. I was 20 minutes late to my Spanish class, soaking wet to my waist, but my teacher would not let me join until I explained my tardiness in Spanish. Sorry, professora, but you never taught us the Spanish word for masturbate. I think I communicated what happened well enough because she did not punish me. In retrospect, I am sure that man was simply engaging in a private sexual act in a place he expected to be alone. It was creepy, but if he had been looking to assault teenagers, the middle of nowhere during school hours was a poor choice. Story 83. I arrived late after having surgery to remove a ruptured appendix and could not walk as fast as usual. The English teacher locked the door and told me to go to the office, but I already had a doctor's note. I kept knocking until he opened the door. He yelled for a few minutes before I showed him that I had surgery 2 days earlier and did not have to return for another week or 2. He quieted down quickly. Story 84. An elderly man had an accident on the bus, and everyone had to get off and wait for another bus to arrive. Story 85. The principal delayed him while talking about a fishing spot the father of the boy had recommended. Story 86. I am not a teacher, but I once was hit broadside by a motorbike while cycling to school. I somehow walked away without a scratch. As a teenager, I was looking forward to the drama of giving my excuse, but when I walked into geography half an hour late, the teacher did not even ask. He just told me to sit down. Get. Story 87. For a few weeks, my bus routinely dropped us off at school 10 minutes late. Each morning there was a constant argument in the high school office about why we had not made it to class on time and should not be punished. Story 88. A student, a player on our National Collegiate Athletic Association top 25 football team, was late to a college midterm. We were in a metropolitan area. He emailed me and said he understood I might think it was a lie, but he had found a man unconscious in his car, had to stop and call emergency services, and would be there soon. I was sitting there proctoring and thinking I was going to have to request a police report to verify the story. The surprising part is he arrived in class, finished the exam on time, and, as I recall, earned an A. Story 89. When I was 22, I attended college night classes after working my day job. It was a tight squeeze between getting off work and the start of my first class, but the teacher was laid back and rarely started on time, so I was fine. One evening, on my way to class, I was on the interstate when a sports car blew past me as if I were standing still. Less than a minute later, I saw a cloud of smoke and vehicles sliding all over the highway. The driver had collided with two tractor trailers. His sports car was wedged under one, the roof torn off, and his head hanging out of the car. I grabbed gloves and a towel from my car and ran to help. His scalp had been mostly torn off, so I used the towel to hold it in place until the paramedics arrived while he sat there screaming. When I got to class, I walked in holding my books in front of me. The teacher asked what had taken so long, since I was about half an hour later than usual. I said traffic had been bad, and he made a joke about how traffic was hellish that night. As I took my seat and put down my books, everyone fell silent. Unbeknownst to me, my shirt was covered in blood, and I was excused so I could go clean up and change. Story 90. I teach a college freshman paper writing class. Over the semester, we have 2 workshop sessions where students bring drafts and critique each other's work. Each workshop counts for 5% of the grade. Missing one without an excused absence forfeits that 5%. An excused absence makes the other workshop worth 10% of the grade. During the first workshop, a student I did not expect to miss had not shown up 60 minutes into the 90-minute class. Normally, I would not allow someone to arrive that late for a workshop, but he had a convincing excuse. He gave me a letter from a doctor in the physical education department. He had judo in the morning and was paired with a more experienced sparring partner who flipped him upside down. He landed on his head. The note said he had temporary memory loss and a possible concussion. The recommendation was that he should go home. I asked why he did not go home. He said he did not want to deal with the complications of missing the workshop. My classroom was on the 5th floor of a building with no elevator, so he had already climbed 4 flights of stairs. I did not want to waste his effort, so I let him stay. He mentioned he could not remember where he put his pen, which he needed to write comments, so I asked a nearby classmate to lend him one. Afterward, I went to the faculty room and told colleagues. They all called it nonsense. Then I showed them the note, which changed their tone. They started accusing me, half joking, of creating a pressuring classroom environment. Summary. A student showed up to class with a head injury and a doctor's note. He chose not to go home because he did not want to miss that day's activity. Clarification of the timeline. The judo incident happened in the morning around 9 or 10. My class met from 4 until 5:30, and the student arrived at about 5. Between the incident and his arrival, he rested and regained his memory, although not completely. He still could not find his pen. A doctor had cleared him of a concussion, but the note recommended he go straight home, which would have required about an hour on public transportation. The student decided to attend the remaining portion of class. He was still wearing judo pants and did a good job critiquing his classmates' work. Story 91. A boy was at the hospital with his girlfriend after he accidentally gave her something that contained peanut butter. She was allergic. Story 92. I was once late to my American Sign Language class. The teacher would lock the door, and you had to sign to the entire class why you were late. A friend of mine had been killed in action while on a tour in Afghanistan. My whole neighborhood, along with the scout troop, turned out and put hundreds of American flags along the main street that ran past his home, and we were all dealing with the emotional fallout. I told my teacher I would not sign to the class and that I would speak with her privately after class. She sent me to the office and I talked with my counselor. I was excused for the day. It was really awful. Story 93. When I was in middle school, I coincidentally had my history class as my last hour of the day 2 years in a row. The third year it was my second to last hour. I did not think it would be a problem, but a couple weeks into the semester I zoned out. I left after history class and was halfway off campus when a friend who was practicing track saw me and asked why I was there. I sprinted back into the building, arrived about 10 minutes late, and had to explain that I had forgotten school was not over yet. Story 94. I walked into a midterm exam 15 minutes late. The professor was going to give me a hard time. I slapped a police report on his desk showing that someone had rammed my car from behind at a red light. The incident occurred 5 minutes away from the college 1 hour earlier. I took the midterm. Story 95. I am not a teacher, but when I was at university I was very late because I had a dream that my lecturer called me and told me that the class was canceled. I told her and she laughed, but because it was so ridiculous she knew I was not lying. Story 96. It was my senior year of college when my mother died halfway through the spring semester. I walked up to turn in a writing assignment I had not submitted before the funeral. The professor scowled at me and asked, "Why are you trying to turn this in late? You know what the syllabus says." He grabbed the paper, saw the obituary attached, looked at me, and I turned and walked to my seat in the back without saying a word. I ended up crying in that classroom. I am a 25-year-old man. I was 22 at the time. Story 97. This was my excuse from high school for missing first period. My boyfriend at the time had been camping outside overnight in front of Macy's in New York City for a chance to buy one of the first 200 bottles of Lady Gaga's perfume. Those first 200 bottles came with a ticket to her Macy's launch event, which included a meet and greet. My parents had said I couldn't sleep overnight outside Macy's, so I didn't go. The next morning I got a call from my boyfriend saying they hadn't sold out all 200 and that if I wanted one I had to get there as soon as possible. The call came in around 7:30 in the morning. I raced to catch a bus into the city from New Jersey, ran from Port Authority to Macy's, bought the perfume, and got the pass. I sprinted back, caught the bus, and ran to class. When my English teacher asked why I missed first period, I said, "Sorry, I was picking up tickets to Lady Gaga's perfume launch event." Story 98. I was training to be a teacher when a 17-year-old student who had just passed his driving test began arriving late to class repeatedly. He said the police stopped and searched his car twice a week. At first we thought he might be exaggerating, but when he started driving to school with another classmate they began arriving late too and confirmed they were being stopped and searched. They were regularly late because of racial profiling of a young black man driving himself to school. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.